I have always found plants to be more reliable than people. They don't lie or pretend to love you when all they truly want is to get rid of you. At 65, after a life dedicated to understanding the silent, resilient world of botany, I finally learned that the only person I could ever truly count on was myself, and perhaps my beautiful northern garden which had taken me decades to create. My name is Martha Thornhill, and I once believed my greatest achievement would be my scientific work, the discovery of a new species. Now I understand my greatest mistake was believing my family would ever see any value in it or in me. Our small town of Harbor Haven in northern Maine isn't much to look at. A lighthouse, a couple of seafood restaurants, and my garden. An achievement so notable it was once featured in the regional magazine Northern Flora. For 32 years I worked at the University Botanical Garden researching and teaching, but my true passion was always the greenhouse attached to our home. It was an old but sturdy 2-story house overlooking the bay, a home my late husband Donovan and I had filled with life both human and botanical. He had been gone for 5 years, taken by a heart attack, and with him went the last voice in my family that ever supported my work. He used to tell me the children would one day understand its importance, but he was profoundly, heartbreakingly wrong. My relationship with my 3 children has always been complicated, but it curdled into something far worse with my eldest Imogen. I remember when she was just 5, her tiny fingers carefully helping me plant the first seedlings in the small greenhouse Donovan built. She loved the feel of the soil back then, the magic of a seed becoming a flower. I don't know precisely when that love soured into resentment. Perhaps it was the year I missed her school concert for an expedition to the Blackwater Marshes where I discovered a rare species of northern moss. Or maybe it was the thousands of tiny moments, the dinners where my herbarium sheets covered the dining table that accumulated like rings on a tree, forming the cold, formal distance between us. "You're living in the last century, Mom," she told me during her last visit, her voice laced with a familiar irritation. "You've always preferred your weeds to us." That single word, weeds, was a dagger she had sharpened for years. The truth was, my body was beginning to betray me in ways my plants never would. 3 years ago, arthritis had crept into my life, first as a mild morning ache, and now as a constant grinding pain in my fingers and knees. The long hours kneeling in the garden became agonizing. This past winter, for the first time, I couldn't clear the snow from the roof myself. The house, once a sanctuary, had become a burden, its 2 empty bedrooms on the 2nd floor, echoing a loneliness that had settled deep in my bones. I considered selling it, but the thought of leaving my greenhouse, my life's work, was unthinkable. Hiring help was a luxury my pension couldn't afford. That's when Imogen's voice, dripping with feigned concern, began to echo in my mind. She had often hinted that such a large house was a waste of resources for a lonely old woman, that I should move into a small studio apartment. I was not naive. I knew her concern was for her inheritance, not for my well-being. So I made a decision. I would give her the house not to earn her love. I had given up on that illusion long ago, but to free myself. I wanted to be free from the crushing weight of its maintenance, free from the ghost of a happy family, and free from expectations that would never be met. But before I could surrender the structure, I had to save its soul. My collection of over 3,000 New England plant specimens, my 40 years of research cataloged in my herbarium, and the unique crossbred species in my greenhouse that existed nowhere else on Earth. These were my real treasures. My dear friend Shannon Woods, a retired caretaker of the local nature reserve, lived in a small, warm cabin on the outskirts of town. Her spacious south-facing porch was the perfect ark. When I told her my plan, she didn't mince words. "You finally realize they don't deserve you or your home?" she asked, her voice blunt as stone. I simply told her I was tired of fighting. She looked at me, her eyes knowing and sad, and predicted they would throw me out the second the ink was dry. I knew she was right. For 5 days I operated like a spy in my own home. Every morning before dawn, I packed the most valuable specimens, my research notes, and my herbarium sheets into special containers. A local taxi driver, sworn to secrecy with a generous tip, helped me transport my life's work to Shannon's cabin. Imogen never visited. She was too consumed by her career to check on her elderly mother. On the final day, I packed a single suitcase with my personal belongings: clothes, photographs, a few pieces of jewelry, and Donovan's wedding ring. The house was now just a shell, its heart already transplanted to a safer, more loving home. The morning I was to sign the papers was crisp and clear. The sun illuminated the greenhouse, casting long, whimsical shadows from the leaves of the plants I had to leave behind. I spent my final hour there, saying a silent goodbye to my 5-year experiment with hybrid mosses. A project with the potential to create natural, hyper-efficient insulation for buildings. I never got around to patenting the method, another casualty of a life spent prioritizing things that were now being stripped away from me. Imogen arrived at the notary's office at 10 o'clock, sharp-dressed in a severe gray business suit, her husband Leighton trailing her like a quiet shadow. The signing was quick, cold, and formal. I transferred the house to her, retaining only a small portion of its value for myself, enough to rent a modest place and live carefully for a few years. As soon as the notary left the room to make copies, Imogen's face, usually a mask of detached composure, broke into a triumphant smile. It was a smile devoid of warmth, a chilling expression of victory. "Finally," she whispered, her voice low and sharp. "Thanks for the house. But now I don't need you. Get out of my life." I looked at her, at the face, so much like Donovan's, now twisted with a malice that had festered for years. Leighton glanced nervously at the door, muttering something about us having a different arrangement. Imogen cut him off, telling him to stop pretending. She declared that I knew perfectly well they weren't going to live with me, that I had my money and could now rent a place far away. I felt a strange calm settle over me. Her cruelty was not a shock. It was an expectation fulfilled. I had prepared for this moment. "I've already moved out," I replied, and for the first time I saw a flicker of genuine surprise on her face. Her triumphant expression faltered. "What?" she asked, her voice losing its edge. I told her my things were no longer in the house, that I had taken everything I needed. When we went outside, I asked her to open the trunk of her car to retrieve my suitcase. She watched me, a new grudging respect in her eyes. "You planned all this," she stated, not asked. "You knew I would kick you out." I looked her in the eye and told her that I simply knew her better than she thought. I wished her happiness in her new house and walked away without looking back. There was nothing left to see. The house was hers, the burden was hers, and for the first time in years I was free. The walk to Shannon's house was long, and my knees protested with every step, but my heart felt surprisingly light. When I arrived, Shannon met me at the door, her face a mixture of grim satisfaction and genuine concern. She didn't need to ask what had happened. She could read it in my posture. She simply stepped aside, welcomed me into her warm, cozy home, and assured me that my plants were thriving on her porch. My northern orchid, she noted, was even about to bloom. That first night, I slept in a small, comfortable guest room surrounded by the boxed-up evidence of my life's true passion. For the first time in decades, I wasn't waking up at 5 a.m. to check the greenhouse temperature. I was a free woman, as Shannon put it, with no obligations to a huge, drafty house or to ungrateful children. The next few days were a blur of careful therapeutic work. I unpacked my collection, arranging each plant on the shelves and tables Shannon had set up in her sun-drenched porch. I talked to them as I always did, my voice a low, steady murmur. Shannon would watch me shake her head and call me a crazy plant lady, but there was only warmth in her smile. While my hands were busy, my mind replayed Imogen's final words. The cruelty was expected, but the sheer, undisguised hatred still left a bruise on my soul. I wondered what Donovan would think if he could see his daughter now. He had always been the bridge between us, the one who could translate my scientific passion into a language she could understand, and her teenage angst into something I could tolerate. Without him, the bridge had washed away, leaving us on opposite shores. A few days after my arrival, my old neighbor Warren Baxter showed up at Shannon's door. He was a gruff 70-year-old retired fishing boat captain, a man of few words but deep integrity. He was holding a large grocery bag, and when he placed it on the kitchen table, I saw it was filled with my old notebooks. I thought they were lost forever, left behind in the garden shed. Warren told me he had found them in the trash can at the curb of my old house. He explained, his voice grim, that my daughter had been on a rampage hiring a crew to haul out furniture, books, and anything else that reminded her of me. Everything was going into a large dumpster. My heart sank. He had seen my notebooks, recognized my handwriting, and pulled them from the heap of my discarded life. These weren't just notes. They contained 5 years of research on my moss experiments, priceless data I had meticulously collected. I thanked him, my voice thick with emotion. He just shrugged, embarrassed by my gratitude, but then he added the words that truly pierced my heart. He told me they had started dismantling the greenhouse. My daughter had told the workers she wanted to build a modern home office in its place. The garden, he said, was next. She had told her husband she wanted modern landscaping. Not my weeds. That night the phone rang. It was my granddaughter Audra. At 17, she was the only member of my family with whom I still shared a genuine warmth. She was a quiet, thoughtful girl who had inherited my love for botany, often spending hours with me in the greenhouse, her questions sharp and insightful. Her voice was tense, afraid of being overheard. She told me her mother had been saying terrible things about me at dinner every night, how I had always put my work before my family, how I had missed her prom for a conference, how I hadn't even been there for her own birth, only showing up 3 days later. The accusations were old and familiar, but hearing them repeated through my granddaughter's distressed voice gave them a new, sharper sting. The worst part was they were all technically true. I had missed the prom. I was presenting my research at an international botanical symposium. I was 200 kilometers away on a field expedition with a group of students when Imogen went into labor. I had always justified these absences as necessary sacrifices for my career for a greater scientific good. But now I was forced to confront the emotional cost of those sacrifices, a cost paid not by me but by my children. Audra told me they had thrown out my college awards and, even more painfully, the family albums. Those albums were the one thing I truly regretted leaving behind. They held the photographic proof of a time when we were happy, or at least a time when I believed we were. My conversation with Audra was a painful awakening. I had always seen myself as a dedicated scientist and a provider. I gave my children a stable home, food, and education. But had I given them what they truly needed? Had I given them my attention, my presence, my emotional availability? Donovan had always been the emotionally attuned one. I was the one who retreated into the logical, predictable world of my research whenever human emotions became too complex. For the first time, I allowed myself to see the past through Imogen's eyes. And what I saw was a mother who was often physically present but emotionally absent. A mother who was more comfortable with her specimens than with her own daughter's feelings. This realization didn't excuse Imogen's cruelty, but for the first time it offered a glimpse into its origins. It wasn't just that she was ungrateful, it was that she was deeply, profoundly hurt, and had been for a very long time. This knowledge was a heavier burden than the house had ever been. It was the weight of a lifetime of my own failures as a mother. The notebooks Warren had rescued became my new focus. In them were the keys to my moss insulation project, the culmination of years of work. I realized that Imogen could destroy the greenhouse, but she couldn't destroy the knowledge in my head and the data in my hands. I decided it was time to finally patent my method. This wasn't about money. It was about legacy. It was about proving that my weeds had value beyond what my daughter could ever comprehend. I contacted Professor Eleanor Fish at Harbor Haven Community College, an old colleague. When I explained my research, her eyes lit up. She described it as a potential breakthrough in green building technology. The college, she explained, had a technology transfer office that could help me navigate the complex patent process. To gain access to their resources, Eleanor offered me a position as a guest lecturer for a course on sustainable development. The idea of teaching again at my age was daunting, but the opportunity was too great to pass up. The director of the technology transfer office, a sharp, energetic man named Michael Dawson, was immediately impressed with my research. He laid out the steps for patenting and even discussed a potential revenue-sharing agreement. An 80-20 split in my favor. I had never thought of my work in terms of commercialization and profit. It had always been about pure science. But now, with my financial future uncertain, the idea of my passion providing for my independence was a powerful motivator. In the midst of this new professional whirlwind, a small personal opportunity arose. While buying specialized orchid soil at the Northern Gardens Nursery, I fell into a conversation with the owner, Doris Mayhew. After I helped her diagnose a problem with her azaleas, she offered me a part-time job as a consultant. She needed someone with deep botanical knowledge to help improve her stock and advise customers. The pay was modest, but the work was grounding a return to the simple hands-on joy of horticulture. In a single day, as Shannon laughingly pointed out, I had lost a house but gained 2 jobs. I was building a new life piece by piece on a foundation of my own expertise. I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't realized I was missing. A few weeks into my new routine, the call came. It wasn't Imogen, but her husband, Leighton. His voice was hesitant and strained. He wanted to meet to talk about the house. My first thought was that they needed money, but the truth was far more complicated and, in a way, far more satisfying. We met at a waterfront cafe. Leighton looked exhausted. The stress of the past few weeks etched onto his face. He explained that after my departure, they had discovered the house needed far more than cosmetic updates. The electrical wiring was outdated. The plumbing was problematic, and the roof needed serious repairs. But the biggest issue was the heating. The old reliable system, which I had meticulously maintained, was completely inefficient for their modern needs, and the cost of replacing it was astronomical. Then he got to the real reason for his call. Audra had told them about my moss insulation project. He wanted to know if my special method could be used to repair the house. The irony was so thick I could taste it. I listened as Leighton laid out their desperate situation. Imogen, of course, would never accept money from me, but she was open to the idea of using my research as a test case. He framed it as a mutually beneficial arrangement. But I knew this wasn't about mutual benefit, it was about their desperation. They had taken my home, dismissed my life's work as a worthless hobby, and now they needed that very work to save them from a financial crisis of their own making. Before I could respond, I asked him a direct question. Why was he telling me this and not Imogen? That's when the conversation shifted, moving from the practical to the profoundly personal. Leighton, perhaps emboldened by his wife's absence, finally spoke his mind. He told me that Imogen wasn't just difficult, she was deeply wounded. He said she had always felt like she was competing with my work for my attention and approval, a competition she felt she could never win. He described her jealousy and envy, not as character flaws but as the cries of a child who felt invisible in her own home. He recounted the story of her winning a dance competition when she was 12. I had missed it for a conference. I remembered the event, but I never knew the impact of my absence. He told me that while all the other parents were congratulating their children, she had stood there alone holding her first-place trophy. She never told me how much it had hurt her. She had learned, he said, to hide her feelings, to pretend she didn't need my approval. According to him, that little girl was still inside her, still waiting for her mother to tell her she was proud. His words hit me with the force of a physical blow. I had always viewed Imogen's ambition and assertiveness as her core nature, but Leighton was suggesting it was a suit of armor she had built to protect a vulnerable heart that I had unknowingly wounded again and again. He explained that he saw history repeating itself with Audra. Imogen was doing to her daughter what she felt I had done to her, dismissing her passion for botany as frivolous, pushing her toward a practical career in business or law. Audra's love for the natural world was in Imogen's mind a painful echo of the very thing that had taken her mother away from her. The house insulation project, he suggested, could be a way to bridge that gap, a neutral territory where we could work together and where Audra could see a practical application for her interests. It was a masterful, if desperate, plea. He was offering me not just a chance to test my research, but a chance to understand and perhaps heal the deep wounds within my family. My leverage wasn't just scientific, it was emotional. And for the first time, I understood its full, devastating power. I sat there, the cold cup of tea forgotten in my hands, processing Leighton's revelations. My daughter, the one I saw as strong and unyielding, was driven by a deep-seated pain I had helped create. This wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about the crumbling foundation of our entire relationship. I looked at Leighton and saw Not just a man trying to solve a financial problem, but a husband trying to save his wife from herself. I decided then that I would help, but not on their terms. On mine. I told him I was willing to consider the project, but I had 3 non-negotiable conditions. First, I required full unrestricted access to the greenhouse, and all my remaining experimental samples. I needed to assess what was salvageable and what needed to be cultivated from the specimens I had at Shannon's Lake. This was a practical necessity, but it was also a symbolic one. She had cast me out of my sanctuary, and now she would have to invite me back in. Second, I insisted that Audra be an official part of the project team should she wish to participate. I wanted my granddaughter to have the opportunity I had failed to give my own daughter the chance to see her passion validated and treated as a serious, valuable pursuit. I wanted her to work alongside me to learn the science and to see that botany was not just playing with flowers. My third condition was the most difficult. I told Leighton that I would not discuss the details of the project with him or anyone else. If Imogen wanted my help, she would have to ask for it herself face to face. No more intermediaries, no more hiding behind her husband. We would meet as 2 adults to discuss the terms of our collaboration. Leighton paled slightly, anticipating the storm this demand would provoke. He knew his wife's pride was a fortress, but I held my ground. I told him that if we were to work on rebuilding the house, we first had to be willing to sit at the same table. If she couldn't do that, then there was no deal. I had spent a lifetime accommodating her temperament. I would not do it anymore. 2 days passed in silence. I half expected my conditions to be rejected, for Imogen's pride to be more important than her crumbling, freezing house. I continued my work at the nursery and the college, my new life a comforting distraction from the family drama. Then on the 3rd day my phone rang. It was Imogen. Her voice was clipped and devoid of warmth, but it was her voice. She stated that Leighton had relayed my message and that she was willing to meet. She set the time and place, the same cafe, and added just before hanging up, "I'm only doing this for the house. Don't think anything has changed." The line went dead, but I felt a small, grim sense of victory. The first brick in her fortress had crumbled. Our meeting was as tense as I had anticipated. She arrived dressed for battle in a sharp business suit, her face an impassive mask. She ordered a black coffee and got straight to the point, asking me to explain the technical aspects of my method. I laid it out for her, not as a mother asking for a favor, but as a scientist presenting a proposal. I explained the integration process, the monitoring systems, and the projected efficiency gains. She listened, her expression unreadable, and then asked why I had insisted on this meeting. I looked her directly in the eye and told her that it was because we needed to learn to communicate directly if we were going to work on the house she grew up in. The mention of her childhood seemed to crack her composure. She retorted that I had no right to talk about her childhood, that my work had always been more important than her. It was the opening I had been waiting for, not to argue but to finally tell the truth. I didn't defend myself. Instead, I admitted my failings. I told her that she wasn't wrong, that I often did retreat into my work. I explained that it was because plants were easier for me than people, that they didn't have complex emotions I didn't know how to handle. I told her I often felt clumsy and out of place as a mother, that her father had been the one who truly understood what she needed. For the first time, she looked at me not with anger but with genuine surprise. The confession hung in the air between us. Then she made a confession of her own. She told me that when she was little, all she wanted was to be like me, smart and confident, hoping that if she were, I would finally be proud of her. This admission shattered the last of my anger. All these years I thought she was rejecting me, when in reality she was desperately seeking my approval in the only way she knew how. I told her, my voice trembling, that I had always been proud of her strength and determination, but that I had failed to show it in a way she could understand. The conversation slowly shifted from a confrontation to a negotiation. We agreed on a schedule and division of responsibilities. She agreed to let Audra participate. As we were leaving, she said, her voice quiet, that she couldn't promise everything would be fine between us, but that she was willing to try for Audra's sake. It was more than I had ever hoped for. The negotiation was complete. Justice in this case wasn't about punishment. It was about forcing a painful, long, overdue reckoning with the truth. The project began the following week. Walking back into my old greenhouse was a strange and bittersweet experience. It was colder than it should have been. Some of the less hardy plants I'd left behind were already showing signs of distress. Imogen had, thankfully, halted the demolition, leaving half-dismantled benches and piles of discarded pots in a state of suspended chaos. My experimental moss samples, however, were surprisingly resilient, protected in their specialized trays in a corner the workers hadn't reached. It was a small miracle, a testament to the hardiness of the very life forms my daughter had so readily dismissed. Audra was there to meet me, her eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Seeing her there, eager to learn, felt like a validation of my entire life's work. Our first task was to cultivate a sufficient quantity of the moss culture. I converted part of Shannon's sunroom into a temporary propagation lab, and Audra became my dedicated apprentice. I taught her the specific nutrient formulas, the light cycles, and the humidity controls required. She was a natural, her hands gentle and her mind sharp. She absorbed everything I taught her with an enthusiasm that reminded me so much of myself at her age. For the first time, I was sharing my passion not as a lecturer to a student, but as a grandmother to her grandchild. It was a form of communication more profound than any conversation I'd ever had with her mother. Imogen kept her distance initially. She would observe our work in the greenhouse from afar, her expression a careful blank. She interacted with me only when necessary, our conversations strictly limited to project logistics, timelines, material orders, and contractor schedules. But I noticed small changes. She stopped referring to my work as that moss stuff and started calling it the insulation system. She once asked Audra a surprisingly technical question about the moss's growth rate. It was a tiny crack in the wall of her pride, but it was a crack nonetheless. The project became a neutral ground, a shared objective that forced us into a functional, if not yet warm, relationship. The house itself was the patient, and we were its reluctant collaborating doctors. The installation was a painstaking process that took several weeks. We worked with a team of specialized contractors who were fascinated by the novel approach. I supervised every step, ensuring the moss panels were integrated correctly into the wall cavities and attic spaces. Audra documented the entire process, taking photographs and detailed notes, her school project transforming into a real-world scientific study. One afternoon, as we were finishing the installation in the main living area, Imogen came in holding 2 cups of tea. She handed one to me, her hand brushing mine. She didn't say anything, but she stayed and watched us work for nearly an hour, a silent observer to the slow, steady healing of her home. With the installation complete, the results were almost immediate, and frankly better than my laboratory tests had predicted. The house, which had been bleeding heat, now maintained a stable, comfortable temperature. The old furnace, which had been struggling to keep up now, ran with surprising efficiency. Within a month, Leighton showed me their energy bill. It had dropped by nearly 30%. The financial savings were significant, but the real victory was seeing the look on Imogen's face as she reviewed the data. It was a look of grudging admiration, the first I had ever seen from her directed at my work. The weeds had saved her thousands of dollars and made her home not just habitable but sustainable. My patent application, bolstered by the real-world data from the house, moved forward with incredible speed. Michael Dawson, the patent officer from the college, called the project a perfect proof of concept. The college began discussing licensing opportunities with green building firms who had heard about the project through the contractors. My quiet life of academic research was suddenly on the verge of becoming a commercially viable enterprise. I was receiving inquiries for consulting work, invitations to speak at conferences. The very things I had stepped away from were now returning to me, but this time on my own terms. My new life was vibrant and full. I was teaching consulting at the nursery, and on the cusp of launching a technology that could have a real impact on the world. I had found my footing not in spite of losing my home, but because of it. The dynamic with my family had been permanently altered. Audra was flourishing. Her work on the project had won her a regional science fair award and a scholarship to a university with a top-tier botany program. Imogen had attended the award ceremony, And for the first time, I saw genuine pride in her eyes as she watched her daughter accept the prize. Later, she admitted to me that she had been wrong to discourage Audra's interests. It wasn't an apology, not in the traditional sense, but it was a monumental admission for a woman like Imogen. Our relationship is still a work in progress. The deep wounds of the past haven't vanished, but they are no longer festering. We can now have a conversation without it devolving into a battle of wills. We speak about Audra, about the house, and sometimes even about the garden. The home that had been a symbol of our division had become the bridge that was slowly, carefully bringing us back together. I still live in my small, cozy room at Shannon's, surrounded by my plants and my research. I have no desire to move back. I learned a hard lesson at 65. A home is not a structure of wood and stone. It is a place where you are valued, a place where you can grow. My home is now a life I built for myself, a life filled with purpose, respect, and the quiet, unwavering loyalty of the natural world.